So one day, you're just sitting alone at home when your friends call you up. Hey, do you want to go to an orgy? And even though you're all cozy watching The Office for the millionth time, every ounce of your being, for some reason, would rather go out to an orgy. So you're like, sorry, I believe in the literal resurrection of Jesus. So, no orgy for me tonight. Being cozy at home, watching The Office, sounds like a great reason not to go to an orgy. But believing in the literal resurrection sounds like such a stupid reason not to go to an orgy, right? Well, not to this guy. There are a lot of Christians that seem to not only think that Jesus literally resurrected from the dead, but that if he didn't, nothing we do in this world matters. But did Jesus literally resurrect from the dead? And why does resurrection still matter if he didn't? Besides being allowed to go to that orgy finally. I'm Mason Menega, and today I'll be talking about if Jesus literally resurrected from the dead and why resurrection should still matter to us. Before we jump in, be sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications. And let me know what you think about the video in the comments. Also, these videos take a lot of time and energy to make, so if you like my content, be sure to support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Mason Menega. It's hard to know exactly how to start talking about resurrection without hurting anyone's feelings, so it's probably easiest to talk about the life of an extraordinary man who lived about 2,000 years ago in a remote part of the Roman Empire. His mother was told before he was born that he would be unlike any other humans because he would be divine. As an adult, he went around preaching to people about living for the spiritual things in life. He eventually started having disciples, and they believed that he was the Son of God. He even did miracles like healing the sick, casting out demons, and raising the dead. Towards the end of his life, he was charged by the Roman government, but they could not kill him because he ascended to heaven bodily. He then came back to visit one of his followers to prove that he was actually alive and not dead. Years later, his followers started writing books about his life and teachings. But if you grew up a Christian, you probably have never read any of these books about this resurrected man. That's because all that I just told you is about a man named Apollonius of Tyana, not Jesus of Nazareth. You might still be recovering from the plot twist, but the kind of stories you hear about Jesus weren't stories from that time that were exclusive to Jesus. Just like there seems to be a million superhero movies that basically tell the same story, there were many other stories about humans who were divine, did miracles, and rose from the dead at the time of Jesus. So what does this have to do with resurrection? Apollonius of Tyana and the many other stories of resurrection during Jesus' time show, whether they believed resurrection literally happened or not, that the metaphor of resurrection mattered to these ancient people. Just like whether we believe superheroes are real or not does not necessarily matter. The metaphor behind superheroes is what captivates us. So let's dive deeper into metaphor and why that matters as we talk about resurrection. Think about some of the things in your life that have transformed you most. Was it a science book or a song? Was it an instruction manual or a poem? Was it a Wikipedia page or Shrek 2? Factual things like a science textbook, an instruction manual, or even a Wikipedia page are helpful and necessary in our lives, but they do not transform who we are quite like metaphorical things like a song, a poem, or even Shrek 2. Metaphors have the power to change us, and so just because something might be a metaphor does not make it less true, but it actually might make it even more true. And this can include the resurrection. Alright, so you might be like, but Mason, if the resurrection of Jesus is just a metaphor, then why is there so much evidence for it? Well, Lee Strobel, let's back up for a second. Let's take seriously the gospel accounts of what happens after the resurrection. If something were to happen historically, we should have more or less the same exact story from different witnesses. I mean, if two people testified in court and their testimonies are different, then we know someone isn't telling the truth, and then Judge Judy will call your shit out.
Judge Judy.
Oh, please.
That's baloney. You look ridiculous.
Got it? You ready?
I'm ready.
You think he's ready?
He's not ready.
But the thing is, the resurrection stories in each gospel are quite different. Did Mary Magdalene go alone or with other women? And if she did go with other women, how many were there and what were their names? Depending on which gospel you read, you'll get a different answer. Was the stone rolled away before they got there or not? And did they see one man, two men, or an angel? Depending on which gospel you read, you'll get a different answer. Did the women tell anyone about the resurrection or were they silent about it? Depending on which gospel you read, you'll get a different answer. So there are major differences and even outright contradictions between each gospel account about the resurrection of Jesus. But that doesn't even get to the fact that there is no description of when the resurrection took place. All we have are accounts after the resurrection, not the description of when the resurrection took place. What did it look like when Jesus was actually being resurrected? We don't know, and the Gospels don't tell us. But what if we are completely misunderstanding how resurrection was understood by one of Jesus' earliest followers? So that means we should explore how resurrection was understood by our evangelical Lord and Savior, Paul. Paul was a Pharisaic Jew, and at the time, Pharisaic Jews believed that the resurrection was something universal for cosmic justice. In ancient Greek, this understanding of resurrection was called anastasis. They believed this anastasis would happen at the end of times and all would be resurrected. So usually when you see the word resurrection in Paul's letters, anastasis is the word used. So given this Pharisaic understanding of resurrection, Paul believed when Jesus was resurrected, it means we were all resurrected with him. Jesus resurrecting is not an exception to resurrection, but an exemplification of all of us being resurrected with him. So that means Paul thought Jesus being resurrected means you'll be resurrected with all your exes as well. So maybe that's the best reason not to believe in resurrection. So if that's how Paul understood resurrection, how did other early Christians understand the resurrection? Well, like your Facebook relationship status, it's a bit complicated. In early Christianity, there started to become a bit of a division between the church in the East and the church in the West. Or you may know these churches as the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. The Eastern Church followed Paul closely and emphasized the universal resurrection, whereas the Western Church emphasized the individual resurrection of Jesus. You can see this clearly in the artwork between the East and the West churches throughout their history. So if Paul understood the resurrection as a universal concept, then how could the Western Church begin to understand the resurrection as an individual concept? Well, Paul, being a good Jew, had a different opinion than other Pharisaic Jews at the time and believed that Jesus did resurrect and believed that in Jesus' resurrection, we are all resurrected as well. So both the individual resurrection of Jesus and the universal resurrection happened together according to Paul. So then each tradition began to emphasize one part of the resurrection over the other, and that is why you see the big difference between how the resurrection is understood between the East and the West. It's almost as big of a difference between the quality of basketball in the NBA between the East and the West. So clearly resurrection had different understandings even by early Christians and throughout early Christian history. Early Christians were aware of the resurrection of other God-men stories during Jesus' time. Paul also understood resurrection as a cosmic universal event since he was a Pharisaic Jew. And then different understandings of resurrection developed throughout Christian history, most notably between the Eastern and Western traditions. So if early Christians had different understandings of resurrection besides a literal bodily resurrection, then why shouldn't we have different understandings of resurrection today? And why should resurrection still matter to us if Jesus didn't literally resurrect? I think you can believe that Jesus literally resurrected, but I also think that we should understand that resurrection is much more expansive than we often imagine. A lot of times when Christians talk about Jesus' resurrection, what they really mean is that Jesus resuscitated. They believe that Jesus was dead and then he came back to life. But that's resuscitation, and Jesus' resuscitation is not universal. Unless you believe you'll join zombie Jesus with hundreds of other zombies like some sort of Christian version of The Walking Dead. So if Jesus didn't resuscitate but resurrected, then resurrection is much more than Jesus coming back from the dead. Resurrection, like Paul understood it, means we are all resurrected with Jesus. We may be dead in many things. Perhaps we are dead in greed, white supremacy, homophobia, listening to Skillet, or a million other things. In Jesus, we are resurrected from that death so that we can live new life. Death did not have the final word with Jesus, and that means death will not have the final word with us. We are resurrected into new life of love and liberation. So, do I deny the resurrection of Jesus? I do. I deny the resurrection of Jesus whenever I do not feed the hungry, clothe the poor, and visit the imprisoned. And do I affirm the resurrection of Jesus? I do. I affirm the resurrection of Jesus whenever I do feed the hungry, clothe the poor, and visit the imprisoned. We do not deny or affirm the resurrection by what we believe, but by how we live. Can I get an amen? So did Jesus literally resurrect? Honestly, I don't care if he did or not. And I don't think you should care much as well. There are many different ways Christians have understood resurrection throughout history, and even Paul understood resurrection as a universal resurrection where all are resurrected. And so regardless if you believe Jesus literally resurrected or not, resurrection should matter because it changes everything. We are not dead to the oppressions of this world, but we have new life to live in love and liberation. So denying or affirming the resurrection really depends on how we live this new life, which can include going to orgies if you're into that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and also tell me what you thought about it in the comments. This video is brought to you by my Patreon producers. If you'd like to become a Patreon producer, you can find more at patreon.com/Mason Menninga.